at King Estate, what'd you sell the first bottle of wine for?
Price-wise,
Yeah.
Oh boy, it'd be 1992. I don't really have a handle on that one.
I don't know either.
We'd have to look that one up, probably.
Yeah, Ed would know.
Yeah, he would know.
Okay.
Yeah, good question for Ed.
Yeah. Yeah,
Save that one for later.
Yeah.
And Bill, how about you? What was your first here? What was your first bottle of wine? How much did it go for, and what was it?
Well, let's see. I came in '95 and was involved in helping blend the the '94 vintage. I guess back then Pinot Gris was going for around 14 a bottle.
14.
And Pinot Noir probably 18, 20, something like that. I'm guessing.
Probably close to 20.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm asking.
I started here in like '99, kind of working crush type duties, and I don't know, probably it'd be over 20 for Pinot, 22 probably.
Yeah.
And the Gris probably didn't change a whole lot, maybe 15 or so.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a guess on my part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the philosophy, the guiding kind of philosophy here at King Estate to making wine?
Well, originally it started out with planting this site, this area, and obviously, even when we started, when the vineyards became productive up until now, we grow about half of the fruit that we use here, and we buy obviously the other half. And the fruit that we grow here, we try to showcase that in what we do in both Signature and all of our domain products, but the domain products kind of showcase what we do here. And we try to stay true to type on that.
True to type, what's that mean?
Well, just in terms of letting the vineyard express what it can at this particular site. This is a relatively cool site. So you don't really see heavily extracted Pinots made here. They tend to be a little higher in acid, a little more subtle, a little more elegant style, food-friendly type wines. You won't see really high alcohols here, that sort of thing. Our wines tend to age really well too. As you go back over the years and you taste, they have a common thread, and as they get older, they get really, really nice.
And nice in terms of?
Their flavor profile, as they age, they get a little softer, but there's still fruit there, and because of the acidity, they hold up really well. There are other wines I've had that taste nice out of the gate, but over time they start falling apart. They're not so pretty as they get some age on them. And I think the whites are similar in terms of high natural acidity, fruit forward. We're not big into oak for Pinot Gris at all.
Zero.
Zero.
Zero, yeah. And Bill can talk more about just kind of how all that happens, but King Estate pretty much set the style for Pinot Gris in America, I would say. There's a number of different styles out there within Oregon, but I think ours, in terms of defining the Northwest style, as being fruit forward, and no malolactic fermentation, no oak. Basically, it's all about fruit.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was the idea? Where did that idea come from to go that route?
The stylistic choice for Pinot Gris?
Exactly.
I think initially they did a bunch of tastings with where Pinot Gris was being grown previously, Italy, Alsace. I don't think there was really any history in California to compare it to. There was production in Oregon, but fairly small. Some of the pioneers from the state were making some, Adelsheim, Erath, Irie, yeah.
His production was like a couple hundred cases maybe.
Right, it was pretty small. And
Ponzi
then
got into it.
Yeah, Ponzi, right. Lang, but the amount of acres was fairly small. I think it had been a little bit more being planted, but when King Estate came in, and the kind of the vision that Ed King had was to go out and come up with a plan for growing Pinot Gris and take it nationally. Not much had been distributed nationally out of the state. And the style, I think, as with all of the wines that we make, we make wine to be consumed with food. And so the balance of acid and fruit is key. And that style with just a hint of residual sugar to balance with the acidity is the style that was arrived at. And we've been consistent with that through all of the vintages that I've been here.
Why Pinot Gris? I mean, it's like the Willamette Valley. You guys are at the southern end of Willamette Valley, and it's the big PN.
Right. Well, we grow PN too. But I think, and in the early years we made a fair amount of Chardonnay too. But again, I think the Kings saw Pinot Gris would have a niche in the market as something other than Chardonnay, and so we went away from that. We still make a little Chardonnay. Plus, there was a lot more Chardonnay on the market, and it was a lot harder to sell Chardonnay from Oregon. And Pinot Gris seemed the obvious alternative. Riesling wasn't really doing it, although Riesling and Gewürztraminer, there was some planted early on and produced. That never really took off.
Well, I got kind of a bad rap too.
Yeah.
Early
Which
on.
the Riesling?
Riesling in
Yeah.
particular, or
Yeah.
Chardonnay for that matter.
Yeah.
Riesling was sort of the cash cow in Oregon. Usually priced pretty low, and was just considered sort of so-so everyday kind of wine, not really taken seriously to
Right.
a large degree. And the Chardonnay, because of kind of odd clones that we got from California early on, never really hit the mark in terms of what could have been done in Oregon. That clone's since gone, and now we have much better clones in Oregon. Chardonnays in general are much better.
What was the first Chardonnay clones? I can't remember. What were those?
108.
108?
Yeah.
That was the big one. Yeah, it just doesn't work here. There's huge clusters, and it's not really designed for this kind of climate.
Yeah, it wouldn't ripen, it would get rot and just not
people-
interesting flavors.
Everybody lost interest in it over time and pulled it all out.
Yeah.
And Riesling, for that matter, was all grafted to something else. Because there was a time when, price-wise, for fruit, you could hardly give Riesling away. But now it's becoming more and more popular. It's becoming more in vogue now. So Riesling's going back in the ground, so is Chardonnay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Well, it seems like the Riesling has changed a little bit too. It's like it used to be, from what I hear, it's like it's that little too sweet, and and now it's actually become kind of more interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, yep. Made it a little more drier style, better balance.
Yeah.
And it's also because of the viticultural areas in Oregon, from the early years till now. I mean, we've got vineyards scattered all over the state. They have some really interesting things that wasn't happening back in those days.
You're pulling fruit from vineyards all over the state.
Yeah, in fact, I think the only, in terms of AVAs, the only one we haven't pulled fruit from recently was the Columbia Gorge.
Huh.
We've got
Right.
fruit from Columbia Valley, Walla Walla, Rogue, Umpqua, Willamette Valley.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of the AVAs within the Willamette Valley, but quite a few of them. So.
And what's the idea of pulling fruit from so many different soil types, climate, microclimates?
I think everything we do here, in some way, shape, or form, revolves around diversity. If you look at our trellising system, we've got a bunch of different trellising systems. We have
I was going to ask you about
just
that.
about every clone you can think of. Rootstocks, we got just about all of those too, here at this property. And amongst the growers, we don't pick them randomly, they're picked for a reason in terms of what they bring to the table as part of the blend of the signature part of our wines. They don't go into our domain wines, but they do the signature.
So what's the philosophy behind like that tremendous amount of diversity? It's like just driving up, like you talked about the different trellising. I mean, each side of the road, like every few hundred feet almost, it seems like you have a different trellis system.
Well, We try to keep as many blocks and as many lots separate as we can all the way through the process up until the point where they're all blended, all the blending takes place. So all these different components gives you, like if you were, the analogy of painting a picture, they're all different colors. It would be kind of boring if we had one clone and one rootstock and all the wine was basically the same.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be terribly interesting. So, yeah, and the outside growers add even more diversity to that in terms of climate and where they're grown.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the whole philosophy there.
Yeah, slightly different nuances and flavors and textures, and what's also good is they don't all mature at the same time. So we can spread out the harvesting season over a period of 3 weeks, 4 weeks, instead of having everything come in at 1 week.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to do.
Yeah, if you're a little winery, I guess you could do that. But
Yeah.
because of our size,
If you have the capacity to be able to do it.
it'd
Right.
be, yeah, if you had that capacity. But yeah, this last crush we did 2,400 tons, and if you were to do that like in a week, would be pretty daunting.
Can't do it.
Yeah, you'd be shuffling tanks and.
It wouldn't happen. So,
Yeah.
We shuffle anyway,
Yeah.
It's kind of insane during that time, but it's,
Yeah.
we have a very workable facility to allow us to do that anyway.
So a little bit about your backgrounds, Bill.
Mhm.
Give me like a 2-minute history about like how you came into wine. What siren did you hear that called you to wine?
My first career was in microbiology, so I was working in a medical field in lab work, making beer and wine at home, and realized that that was a lot more enjoyable at the end of the day to go home and enjoy some wine than the other specimens I was working with. So I went down to Davis in 1990 and graduated with a master's degree, worked in the California industry for a couple of years, and then realized I wanted to live in the Pacific Northwest. That's where I had been living in Seattle and Oregon, and this opportunity came along here in '95, and I've been here since then.
So what's attractive to the Pacific Northwest for you?
Just beautiful scenery, moderate climate, access to the ocean and mountains within an hour drive, and large city cultural capabilities. Great place to raise a family.
So you have kids and
2 boys. Yep.
yeah.
So all of that together, it's a great place to live. I grew up in South Dakota, where a little bit harsher climate, not a big viticultural area either.
I was talking to a guy just a couple of days ago, and he's growing grapes in Montana, in the Bitterroot Valley.
Yeah, there's wineries in every state, and actually there's some where my wife grew up, just across the Missouri River in Nebraska. There's a small vineyard too.
Is that right?
Yeah.
On the flat?
wow.
And in the Sandhills, yeah, in Nebraska.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I think they're crazy, but they're making fruit wine too.
Yeah.
Fruit,
But
like berry or
some
cherry
berries,
or,
berries, yeah.
yeah. So John, what called you to the wine industry?
I started making wine with my dad when I was 10. He
Where was that?
in Seattle. He was
Can I get you to get a little closer to the mic?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, sorry.
I was in Seattle. He was a home winemaker too, and he kind of got me into it. And started out making fruit wine, and then graduated into making wine out of grapes that came from California. They'd ship them up on rail cars.
Ship the grapes?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, because I remember being a kid. I went over.
They still do that.
At that time, San Michelle didn't exist, and it was Nowico wines on East Marginal Way in Seattle.
Wow.
That was back, way back. Anyways, I went there and talked to them when I got a little older and wanted to get a job. And they said no. But anyway. I ended up
Yeah, but you
working-
shouldn't ask for the winemaker's job right away, though.
Well, that's probably true. I started talking working right now.
That's right.
I ended up going to the University of Washington. I was working at that time it was called Associated Vintners, which later became Columbia Winery. But I'd worked there on weekends and holidays and stuff like that in the summertime. And I left the University of Washington and transferred to Davis. And then when I got out of there, and that was 1978, I went back to AV and was an assistant winemaker there. and up until the time where they moved it from Redmond to
Patterson.
No. It was from Redmond to Woodinville.
Oh.
Yeah, to Woodinville. That's about the time I left there and came down here to plant a vineyard. So my family planted the vineyards up in Yamhill County. That was in 1981.
Which vineyard was that?
Laurel Vineyard.
Laurel?
Yeah. We still have that vineyard. So anyways, so we started growing grapes here, and eventually, along the way, I was working at Blitz Weinhardt Brewing Company as a brewer, and that closed in 1999, and I came to work here, kind of part-time, working crushes and that sort of stuff, and also started making my own wine, my own label here, J. Alvin Winery. I still do that here on the site type thing. And just sort of went from one thing to the next and ended up a winemaker along with Bill. And that was, what year was that, 05? I think
it was 3 years ago almost.
Yeah, so it would have been, 04.
05.
Yeah. And the rest is history, as they say.
One of the things I wanted to ask you guys, and especially John, you've got quite a perspective. I mean, you've been around in the Northwest for quite a while. It's like, what was I'm focusing on Oregon here. What was the Oregon wine culture like when you started out?
Oh boy, it was it's still a tight-knit group, but it was even more so back then.
And what's tight-knit? What does that mean? It's like cliquey or?
Not so much that, but a lot of discussion, a lot of talking amongst wine folks.
So sharing.
Yeah. Yeah, find what didn't work well, what did work well, and people tend not to have a whole lot of secrets in Oregon. For the most part.
Yeah.
But I know, like, planting a vineyard back in those days was difficult because there was no OBS, there was no, place to go down and get a bunch of vineyard supplies. It was sort of cobbling things together that you could find, and so it was a little more difficult.
Yeah.
But definitely doable, obviously. But, so it's changed a lot in terms of the attention Oregon's got and all the infrastructure that goes with all that. And when you have people, heavy hitters that have moved into the area, like King Estate and Domain Serene and all these people, it kind of focuses attention, and all the other stuff comes with it. So nowadays you can just call up and order whatever you want to plant a vineyard. It's right down the road. There's labs here now that can do lab work, and it's just a lot more developed. I don't want to use the word professional, but it's just more polished. A little bit less mom and pop the way it used to be. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think initially when I came here, the number of wineries was probably half what it is now, and most of those were small, family-owned wineries making wine from their own vineyards. And maybe the quality was a little bit more inconsistent in those.
From vintage to vintage, or from winery to winery?
Both. Both. And I think more growers without wineries planted more grapes were planted. And there was, I think, after the wine tasting where Oregon did well in France, what year was that?
Oh, it was like...
there was like in the 70s, and then there was like an 80s.
Yeah, where Ponzi's wine got recognition.
Did really well too.
Yeah. I think that really put Oregon on the map, and there was influx of money investment from other countries and other states. The ones that John mentioned, France, the Domaine Drouin came in, and people with money from other industries came in and built fairly nice showcase wineries. So the technology improved, the science improved, but it's, like John said, it's always been a pretty close-knit group of people sharing ideas, trying to bring the entire industry up in quality together. So it wasn't real cliquey or strong competition one against the other to outdo everybody. It was, let's do things right together and improve the quality.
Well, you came from Napa prior to coming here.
Right.
What kind of cultural differences did you experience, like as a winemaker?
I think there was a little more competition, maybe a few more egos involved there.
Let's see, now, what years were you in Napa?
I was there in '94, mainly
okay.
for a year, and then I worked just across the hills in near Woodinville, or not Woodinville, Woodland, Esparto at R.H. Phillips, and but different mentality. I think some of the people, the winemakers, cellar people, still met and shared technology and science, but and that still happens. It's just a lot more expensive land, so it's harder to start up there. So I don't know. It's a lot more tourist. It's a huge touristy area. Although Oregon has pretty good tourists as well.
It certainly is.
I think that's the main differences I saw.
When you look out like to the future now, let's say, let's look out 20, 30, 50 years. Will there still be an Oregon wine industry?
Oh, definitely, yeah. It continues to grow. I mean, the thing about when you say Oregon, it's such a big state, viticulturally. I mean, there's a lot of room to grow in the Columbia Valley, Walla Walla, Columbia Gorge, Southern Oregon. Willamette Valley, the north part of the valley is getting harder to find land to plant. People are going farther west into the foothills, not so much east. Can't go north because that's a different state, but heading south into, like where we are, Plain County and Benton County, you'll see a lot more vineyards going in there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start filling in the blanks, And I'm sure that there will be vineyards planted that would be just phenomenal that we don't even know about yet. So.
What makes you say that?
Well, you look around at the hills and you drive through the Willamette Valley and you see areas that I would really like to plant that hill.
Because of the orientation,
yeah,
or
the
because
orientation, the elevation, and you know what the soils are pretty much like and what the weather's like in that area.
Uh-huh.
And they're all over. I mean, someday they'll probably be planted, So.
Yeah. He said one word that I think is going to be a key over those 20 to 50 years is weather, with global warming, and finding sites that are going to be cooler yet, because right now we're considered a cool climate, viticultural area. That could change. We might have to change and grow different varieties.
Or go higher up.
Or go higher on the hillsides, yeah. And how that all plays out, who knows?
People are already kind of tinkering with things like Syrah in the Willamette Valley. Dolcetto, I've seen that, people planting that. Tempranillo.
We've got some Tempranillo right in our neighborhood.
Yeah, people are tinkering Viognier and all kinds of stuff. So,
yeah.
But Bill's right, Pinot Noir, there may be sites that people would have thought 10 years ago would be not plantable, that in the next 20 years probably will be covered in Pinot.
Yeah.
One of the things I think about is like in France, let's say, it's like those guys have such a tradition. I mean, those vineyards have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. They have a tremendous tradition.
Right.
Here in Oregon, I mean, post-prohibition, I mean, it's like this new wave has started. There was, some fruit planted prior to that. And then, like, our culture, the American culture, is way different than the French culture. And then you get to Oregon, and the Oregon culture is different than even like the American culture. I mean, there's kind of an Oregon attitude. And, Bill, you probably, can talk about that with expertise coming from, from California. Going from north, going south, and then coming back up again. And so that's why I wonder, what the industry is going to look like because of our American culture and the Oregon culture. And we're seeing a little bit of that now, like, PERS and, big money coming in,
right.
As investments and things. And so that's why I wonder, what things are going to look like because of those kinds of influences.
Yeah.
Land prices are going to go up. They're not going down. And the financial aspect is going to be critical. Some of the small family-owned vineyards, as the parents retire, who knows what happens? The kids may not carry on.
Yep.
And the same with the small family-owned winery vineyard. some of those have already changed hands. There's some locally that have been up for sale, and up north as well.
Yeah. And there's also constant pressure with some of the earlier vineyards are now being encircled by homes.
Right.
So it's, I don't know what's going to happen to this.
What happens that? What happens like when like the vineyard is surrounded with like a subdivision or a bunch of big McMansions and things? What happens?
Well, I can tell you what's happened like where my vineyard is, as houses start moving in, people who are not necessarily in tune with agriculture in general don't make very good neighbors.
You're talking about like sprays, you're talking about the noise,
all that kind of stuff.
The workers starting at 7 and 6 in the morning.
It's sort of, there's no middle ground. People either really like it or they really don't like it.
Uh-huh.
So there's not a whole lot you can do other than try to get along, I suppose. But, as there are a lot of vineyards obviously that are getting planted farther west, and there really isn't a whole lot of development out there, but people like to build houses on hills. That's where the vineyards are too.
Yeah.
So, we'll see. This whole thing with measure 37 and 49, I don't know. That's going to change things too.
Talk a little bit about that. What do you like? 49, modified 37 just a little bit. 37.
It did, but it also kind of my take on it though sort of kind of trashed the whole planning aspect. So now it's sort of not really a free-for-all, but close to it, where you have a lot of land planning that was in place, and either you like that or you don't like that. But all these measures have kind of dismantled, for the most part, a lot of that. So you're going to see a lot of building where it was never intended to be, and so I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to make for more development in terms of housing and homes. And we'll see how that impacts agriculture, but
yeah. Bill, what about you? Like the culture, again, it's like I'm thinking about, you came from the north, went to California, saw a different kind of a culture, the California mentality, and then you came back to Oregon, and Oregon has a very distinctive kind of mentality here.
I think just in lifestyle, it's in the Eugene area, it's a little bit slower paced. Not as much of a rat race, commuting long distances to go to your job. It's a little bit more hectic in the north, where John lives, where you live probably, just in traffic in general. But availability of culture and cuisine is different than where I grew up in South Dakota. Different. The fresh fish, fresh produce. I think more sustainable, organic type food.
You say that
is
was
available here. No,
available here.
Available here, yeah.
So like that's like an attitude that brings those kinds of things.
Definitely, yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about that attitude.
I think people are just maybe a little bit more in tune with lifestyle and health, and what organic brings towards that. Yeah, I think it's for whatever reason it's not as pronounced where I grew up in South Dakota. People are more tradition with meat and potato type diet, and here it's more vegetables. In Eugene, for a high percentage of vegetarian, vegan even. Yeah.
I think when you see vineyards and wineries moving into any area, it's like a magnet that draws all the foodies, restaurants, all that kind of stuff. If there wasn't a wine and vineyard industry here, I doubt you'd see, Portland being kind of a center for some really, really nice restaurants. I mean, it may have happened, but I think they certainly made it a lot faster. More.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing with Eugene, really. So.
Yeah. Tell me about, like, you guys are organic, certified organic. What's the thought process there?
What's the why?
Yeah, why? I mean, what's the advantage?
Oh,
and
boy.
then, Bill, can you taste it in the bottle?
question. I kind of have my own thoughts on that. About, in terms of why organic, maybe a better question would be why not organic. In terms of being friendly to the environment, whether the wine tasted better or not is sort of immaterial. It's just the right thing to do.
Because?
Well, non-organic viticulture and or winemaking has a whole range of what that means. I mean, some people have like mental pictures of some horror story with all kinds of chemicals and herbicides and pesticides and have a scorched earth mentality. But that would be an extreme. You don't see too many farmers with that kind of a mindset. You see a lot of farmers who are maybe not organic but close to it. They're very close to it, and they're not really hung up on being organic. And you've got everything in between. So when you say non-organic, that doesn't mean a lot to me because there's lots of different ways to farm and lots of different farmers. But if you are certified organic, it's pretty cut and dry what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So and Bill, what's your perspective on that? And can I taste it in the wine?
I agree with John. The viticultural part just makes sense, being good stewards of the land, and I agree. Most of the farmers and vineyard owners that we buy from are very close to being organic, and I think are proud of being that way. Whether you can taste it in the bottle or not, it's if there is a difference, it's pretty subtle. But there's a differentiation of organic wine, which is wine without any added sulfites, which is not what we make. We make wine where we add sulfites to preserve the wine, and it's very difficult to make a true organic wine. It's very delicate, very prone to oxidation. It can be done. There are some wineries that are doing that.
So we make wine with organic grapes.
Exactly.
It's not necessarily organic wine.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think what's more key is that the fruit from the vines from vineyards that are grown organically, the vines tend to be in better balance.
What does that mean?
They grow and grow to the correct tons per acre per se. With
goals that you've set
with minimal manipulation of pruning or dropping fruit. The acidity is in better balance. The nutrients in the grapes that the yeast need to ferment are in the correct proportion to ferment properly without any issues. And so all of the biochemicals are in better balance also, I believe, which should then transcend to better flavors and aromas and texture and wine quality. And whether you can say that for sure every year, every block, every vineyard, I think is difficult. But I think there are some subtle differences. I mean, we taste our wine against other growers that are sustainable, which may not have the right nutrient level, which during the fermentation sometimes we have some fermentation dynamic issues with.
And what you said that there might be some subtle differences, when you're tasting other, like I'm trying to, to smell those, and I'm trying to taste those differences. Tell me a little bit about like what you're picking up.
Maybe just intensities of aromas or more complex array of aromas that are coming from the wine. Different descriptors, more descriptors, maybe a fuller mouthfeel, better acid balance, all of those things.
That's interesting.
Something you can't really quantify, can't measure it in the lab.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to get a handle on, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But Bill was talking about nutrients. When you're going the organic route, it's when you perceive that a vineyard needs something, the route that you take tends to be a long-term one. It's like all the compost that we make here, all the things that go into the compost, and you start putting that into a vineyard, you don't really notice a significant difference like the next month or maybe not even the next year, but over the course of time, 'cause we've been doing that now for 15 years, it's kind of a cumulative effect that you get the vineyard, like Bill was saying, in balance, it tends to stay that way. Mm-hmm. So,
and the idea of the compost is,
well, the idea of it is that you're taking things away from the soil. Okay.
When you harvest and you
so you're
pull the fruit.
Exactly.
Say, for example, you didn't compost and you owned a vineyard and you grew fruit and you sold it to a winery. So you're exporting things off of that property pretty much all the time.
Uh-huh.
And if you don't put something back in, it tends to catch up with you after a time. You're kind of mining things out of the soil that needs to be put back in.
Yeah.
And for us, well, for anybody for that matter, composting is kind of an easy way to do that because you're taking what came off and you're putting it right back on again. And making subtle adjustments. If your site is not quote unquote perfect, you can do something about that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's very much a long-term thing.
And pretty much most of the growers we work with are doing that. They're taking some soil samples and analyzing what they need and supplementing it.
Supplementing it with compost or with, like chemical?
Well, there's lots of things. Like, for example, compost is an obvious one that's kind of has a lot of things going on there. But if you, most of the soils in the whole Willamette Valley tend to be kind of acidic soils. Mm-hmm. And so you can alter that by putting on limestone, that sort of thing, which is also organic, mined out of the ground and ground up and put back on.
Yeah.
So there's an example of something that you don't really make. You're putting it on as a amendment, that sort of thing. So yes, it all kind of works together.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of soil sampling, tissue sampling, and so we kind of monitor the vine's health and progress. And healthy vines tend to also be more resistant to other problems.
Like?
Powdery mildew, detritus, if it's unrooted, even phylloxera, a little more, not quite so subjective to just tipping over and dying.
Yeah.
So all those sorts of things. Insects, resistant to insect problems. If a vine's got pretty much what it needs, they tend to be healthier. They're able to ward off some of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I mean, it's like if you compare it to human body, if you take care of your body,
if you get what you need, you're healthier in general.
Excellent analogy.
Yeah. What has, and this is for each one of you, it's like, what has the vineyard taught you about life? What kind of lessons have you learned from the vineyard?
From growing grapes in general, you mean?
From growing grapes, it's like you're very connected to the vineyard because, it's like you're pulling fruit from there and you're doing things.
You guys, we were just saying that you guys were in here arguing, trying to get the name of the book changed to Bill and John's Winery in Oregon. And the big argument was
that's a good one.
Bill and John or John and Bill's. I'm Ed King.
Oh, I'm Janis Miglavs.
Hi, Janis. How are you? This is Michael Landsberg, our chef.
Michael, I'm very glad to meet you.
I don't think you've been over probably yet to the restaurant area.
No, these guys courted me, and we've been fighting about that title that you talked about. And I mean,
Oh man. There's no shortage of ego in Oregon, so if you want.
Can I quote you on that?
You can quote me on that.
All right.
And if you live through this conference, you can quote me on that. So I'm putting on some coffee. So you guys having a good meeting?
Yeah.
What do you
We're just getting to the good questions now.
Oh,
I kind of got them warmed up a little bit. Yeah, these are the good questions now. Yeah. So,
when did you first meet Brittany?
At King Estate 20 minutes ago.
God, hopefully you don't actually know somebody named Brittany. Deer, headlights?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we've got that all on tape now.
Yeah? Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So, Ed, can I talk with you after these guys are...
Yeah, or sure. I'll sit in and wait while I wait for the coffee to come up.
There you go.
Okay. Unless it's confidential. I don't know.
No.
I mean,
No, feel free to jump in.
When did you both first meet? See you later, Michael.
Nice to have met you.
You'll see him later, probably.
Okay.
Are you going to go down to see Melatown? He's our vineyard manager.
I'd like to, because of like I like talking to vineyard guys a lot.
He's a good farmer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ed, can I somehow get you?
Finish up with this, guys. I didn't want to.
Okay,
Don't zigzag for me.
The question is, what has the vineyard taught you about life? And that's like the whole industry.
Well, for me
The
personally,
whole industry of the vineyard.
Well, for me personally, being in vineyards and growing grapes, it makes you a little bit more attuned to what's going on around you.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, like, for example, I look at when grapevines first start budding out, and I would notice that that's the same time that, like, maple trees have all those blooms on
The
them.
little red flowers.
Yeah.
Or you'll notice that when they certain process, a certain time of the year when they're turning red,
Right.
is about 4 weeks to harvest.
And you see, like, we haven't seen apples are starting to get ripe. It's about the same time they start turning purple. And so you see things and you put things together that I would have probably been completely oblivious to if I wasn't growing grapes.
Yeah.
Maybe apple growers do the same thing. Hey, grapes are growing away. Maybe they do. I don't know.
Usually with a certain amount of anxiety, though. It's not the misty kind of.
And that's the grape growers that have the anxiety, or the apple growers?
The grape growers. I don't know about the apple.
Well, you also did a lot of comparison too. Like, lilac's blooming here. I go to my place and mine's not in bloom yet. So you kind of look at different stuff.
There's some angst that goes with it.
Yeah, it's not necessarily all
so,
happy, fizzy.
No, you're looking at the tea leaves and you're not always, it's not always optimistic. Do you ever find that you think it ties you into a whole annual cycle in a different way, a real different way? You tend to see things, sometimes critics who write about books will talk about the difference between psychological time and chronological time, and how we all experience the same thing. A little time in the dentist chair takes about 3 years. A nice evening can go by like that, and so that's psychological time. And I think that we see a thing where when anxiety is starting to build about harvest, where things will slow down and become a little more painful sometimes.
That's another thing. You get really tuned into weather.
Yeah. You live and die by the weather.
Everybody's looking at the weather reports every half hour.
It's like
especially at harvest times.
Yeah,
specifically.
Yeah, and that, and maybe when it's frosting in the spring.
Yeah.
But you do a lot of. It's like taking. Well, it gets kind of obsessive. And you go up and down, your kind of emotional, psychological profile kind of goes up and down with the weather forecast. Yeah. So we talk about shopping around until you find a forecast that you like.
That you like.
Yeah.
But isn't the main forecaster is upstairs, and not everybody has the direct line there.
No, nobody does. That's why it's this. It's like the ancient oracles in Greece or Delphi, where they would call up and ask for. Is this a good time for a battle or not? And go ahead and look at some sheep guts and tell you whether it was a go.
And so you're saying that you consult oracles before harvest?
Yeah, the weather.
Oh, okay.
Weather.com,
so they're
oracles, AccuWeather, and any possible weather source. And then the stories go around. Hey, I saw a good forecast. Really? Oh, that's good. I saw a bad one.
So, Bill, how about you? What has the vineyard taught you?
Well, I think for me, I grew up on a farm in South Dakota, and so I have ties to the land. And I think you really experience that. I mean, it's the same thing in the vineyard. You see the soils, how things are growing, the cycle of life. I mean, it's a yearly cycle of growth, maturing the fruit, harvesting it, bottling the wine. So and that cycle continues year after year, whether you want it to happen or not. I mean, it goes on, and it ties you to family and friends, and enjoying life and enjoying food and wine together. It's part of that. Wine, historically has been around forever, and so that I think ties it all together for me. Yeah.
As long as we've been an agricultural species, which has probably been 100,000 years, and I think that we see these things, that are threads in who we are. Like, if your ancestors came from Northern Europe and tended to be, part of those cycles, you may have an affinity for cold climates. You may have an affinity for, the harvest and the annual cycle like that in a way that, for instance, the urban dweller is utterly unaware of. I think someone who spends a lot of time in their own garden also, and we, probably the three of us, don't spend as much time in the dirt as, say, Melitone does. So I don't want to...
Melitone, the vineyard manager.
Yeah, I don't want to overplay that, but I know from my own gardening that one tremendous comforting thing about working with plants and soil is that you do see this annual cycle and you do feel that much closer, and there's a certain amount of comfort that's taken, and even in the human life cycle, that there is this renewal and that there's this natural process, and that you may we may all wish that we had immortality, or we go on and on forever, but there's a certain comfort in realizing that no, you don't. Nothing does. But also that there is a natural normalcy to this type of cycling that gives you a sense of a place and location that you do not have if you sort of float across the suburban surface of life in America or anywhere else. So that's a wonderful thing. I think that one thing I would say that distinguish perhaps our situation from Bill's roots in the Dakotas is
our situation here in Oregon.
Growing grapes, yeah, and being in the wine industry is. I look at this when I think about my family roots are in Kansas. They grow a wheat crop. They get to harvest it in June. They don't know they don't know what their bushels, how many bushels an acre they're going to get, what the volume is, but they're going to get a harvest. Maybe in the worst absolute calamity, they're going to lose a harvest. That's very rare. What they do is they have these fluctuations in volume, but they never live and die by quality in the same way that we do. See, for us, I mean, it's not always certain we're going to get a harvest at all. Also, the little nuances and differences in quality on an annual basis can have a big impact. So I don't know of any other agricultural business, and you guys help me out here, any other agricultural business, maybe coffee, that depends so much on the actual quality and with annual fluctuations that we have. I don't know of any.
That's a good point. Most, like you were saying, people aren't rating. You don't see like a wine spectator for milk or something when you're scoring milk.
Or apples.
Apples, yeah.
It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. It's a really interesting and intensive little crucible from that point of view.
Yeah.
It makes tobacco, cigars.
Yeah, maybe somewhere special fields they do terroir and special blocks of maybe
Hondurans,
Cuban the cancer block out there.
So what does that mean, like, for you personally? It's like, what kind of lessons do you draw from that, or have you like learned any lessons that you apply to, say, like a business deal, or to strategic planning, or to things in your life? Bill, you mentioned family.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. For me, I tend to take a longer view of things than I think I used to. Being a farmer. Cause and effect, what you do today, you don't necessarily look for anything to come of that for many years. Yeah, so it teaches you a certain amount of patience, I guess.
Yeah, you have to take long views because you just can't hurry some things in this business at all.
Yeah. Same thing with wine too. I mean, you make wine a lot of times, you don't really know what it has all to give for a long time, for many years that go by. Certain vintages show certain things as they get older that aren't immediately apparent when you make them.
How do you feel about the fact that, in a lot of businesses, there's a few variables, and if they control for those variables to a reasonable degree, buy some insurance, hedge against the whatever sow belly market or whatever, they're fine. Our business, there's probably 50 to 100 important variables and you can probably only control half of them if you're lucky. And you never know how they're all going to blend together when it all comes out. You still don't know. It's a very hard business to really quantify and limit risk in, because there's so many variables that are really out of your control.
Do you think that is more prevalent in Oregon than, say, in Napa Valley or in?
Yes.
Why? What makes it?
Well, it's the weather. Cold climate viticulture is much more challenging. Much more challenging. I mean, we're at the edge of really what's feasible. It's where it happens to be the best wine, but it's also where the variables can, or the standard deviation is a bigger range.
Yeah. Yeah.
For us, in terms of quality, higher highs and lower lows.
Higher highs in terms of?
Just in terms of just phenomenal vintages you don't see them every year here. Maybe this is 100% accurate, but Napa, I mean, for them, quality is sort of not necessarily a given, but again, it's sort of like another good harvest, but it's down this year.
It's a narrower range. It's a little bit more like our wheat crop thing. It's the actual quality of the particular vintage is maybe a little less important, and they talk a lot more about volumes. Did they have a lot or not so much? Because that implies a certain genericity, a certain norm that's fairly narrow around the center. We just say in Oregon, we're going to see a bigger spread, as John said, higher highs and lower lows of quality. And they'll vary year by year in block by block. But then there are all these other variables out there that, what's the trellis like, what's the soil like? Last year this was a great vineyard. This year it's a couple degrees cooler, it's not going to be good, but some other vineyard's going to shine.
Yeah.
So you just don't have the same, your standard deviation is, you're going to be across a broader range.
It kind of circles back to where we were talking about diversity too. That kind of addresses that. You don't want all your vineyards all at the same elevation or the same soil or the same AVA. You'd like to, at least in Oregon anyway, you can kind of hedge your bets a bit by where all these vineyards are and where you get fruit from.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what is a winemaker? What does he bring to the bottle? We'll start with Bill.
Oh baby. Hey, I was going to speak to Lindsay also.
I would hope so.
Okay, yeah. She's here.
I'm going to have to leave her pretty quick.
And what I actually prefer is more individual kind of stuff. It's like, because I didn't bring a mic for a big group kind of a thing. It's like I brought a little mic that's supposed to be attached to...
Well, I think also if John stepped out, Bill could say what he really thinks about it.
About John.
About John, yeah.
I got about maybe 5 minutes. And I got
all right, well, let's run over this question then. Yeah. Go ahead, John. What's a winemaker bring to the bottle?
Well,
given all these other things that we've talked about.
Well, there's a couple things. These are broad generalities, but a really good winemaker can't make really good wine out of bad fruit. A bad winemaker can make bad wine out of good fruit. So, in some respect, winemakers need to know what good fruit is and take really good care of it. That's what they bring to the bottle, is sort of ensuring that what you get in the vineyard, whatever that has to offer, the winemaker can coax out all of it, not part of it, or none of it if you're a really bad winemaker. That's what they, in my view anyway, that's what they bring to the table.
Okay.
So,
Bill?
It's all quality control and managing. Kind of ties in with what John was just saying. Knowing the techniques and to carry the fruit. It's being a steward of the fruit through the entire process. And once it hits the winery doorstep, processing it correctly, fermenting it correctly, and aging it and getting it through all of the steps that it needs to, and put it in the bottle correctly, the last step. There are, as Ed I think alluded to, so many variables along the way, and trying to control as many of those variables as you can, and not overlook any details. It's attention to detail on every step of the way through the process. Some of it's analyzing it, and the fruit and the wine, to know where it is with acidity, alcohol, sweetness.
Is that in the lab, or is that out in the vineyard?
Both. Both.
It's also on the palate.
On the palate and tasting, yes.
So,
Yep.
visual inspection. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. One last question for John here, or two more questions for John before he takes off. John, in your time in the wine industry, what's been like a moment of success for you? Something that you just, maybe it was something that you had this idea and you wanted to try it out and it worked, or something that just, it was an aha moment. Yeah.
What's the second question?
It's tougher than the first question, so
really?
let's take a one at a time here.
Oh gosh,
This is the featherweight one.
well, for me personally, having the opportunity here.
I hate to interrupt, but Janis, this is Lindsay Camp.
Hi.
Janis Miglavs, I'm very glad to meet you.
Very nice to meet you.
Lindsay's a red wine winemaker. So,
All right, very good.
Lindsay, if you want to pull up a chair, John's asking a question about his most famous aha moment.
Not most famous, but one that he feels really, successful personally. That was a personal.
Well, I think it was the first time I was able to make wine out of my own fruit. I did that here. Up to that point, I'd sold fruit for many, many years, but never was able to make wine out of it. So being able to actually do that for the first time was pretty cool. That was great.
How'd you feel?
Great. I mean, it was, how did I feel? It was being able to go through the entire process and then
The entire process from growing
it, because my wife and I, and my mom and dad for that matter, we planted all those vines, and then actually getting the fruit and into a winery, and then processing the fruit the way you want to, and then being able to go all the way down, putting it in the bottle with your name on it. Well, it was a really great feeling, and the wine was really good too.
It was good. I was going to ask that. The follow-up question to that is just like, can you recall like bad word moment? Something that something that was just I wish this hadn't have happened, or something.
Just the opposite of the aha moment.
Yeah, the opposite.
The oh shit moment.
The oh shit moment.
This is GP rated, so it's the OS word moment.
Oh, there's so many of them.
I know, I had a lot today.
Yeah,
not just.
Well, I want to take a longer perspective than just in the last week or so.
In a lifetime, of all the bad things that have happened, what stands out as the worst?
In the vineyard.
I remember that.
This is in the vineyard only. Okay.
Well, in the vineyard or in the wine industry, something related, to winemaking or to
Yeah.
and keep it in Oregon.
Oh yes, in Oregon. Well, I tell you, I remember we bought our vineyard property and we had it all prepared and we had it all staked out and we were getting ready to plant.
Listen, that was in 1981.
1981, and it was the very first day of planting, and it was in April, and it started to snow really hard, and I had that sinking feeling, I think we're in the wrong spot. That was my oh shit moment.
California. We're not in
We're
California.
not in California anymore. But it got better since then, so it all worked out.
Global warming came in.
Hey, global warming, the snow melted.
Snow melted, and
No icebergs or anything
No
on
icebergs. And it's been 26 years, 27 years later, they're still going.
Yeah, and now they're big.
Now they're not babies anymore.
Too cold for phylloxera.
Maybe
Too old for phylloxera?
Too cold.
Oh, too cold. Oh.
We're out in the middle of nowhere. Hopefully we won't get phylloxera. You never know.
Yeah.
We know where to get plants if you do.
Yeah, we have ways to fix that.
The only thing is 26 years, a 26-year-old vine is a nice.
It is, and they're pretty rare around these parts.
Yeah.
There's not that many of them.
Yeah.
Most of them died, so, the ones that survived, there's not too many of them around.
Or were pulled out.
Or were pulled out.
Yeah. Yeah. Bill, what about you? What was Do you need to take off? Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Very nice to have met you.
Yep.
Yeah. Hey, thanks a lot.
Enjoy the
Appreciate
rest
it.
of your day.
I plan to.
I'll call you guys.
Talk to
All
you
right,
later.
take care, John.
Drive safe.
Where does he head? This side?
No,
Just
to
north?
what's that meeting?
Oh,
It's
he's
the
going
same-
to the governor's
Yeah.
carbon
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Carbon neutral thing.
Carbon neutral.
Yeah.
So, Bill, what about you?
No,
You know,
I'm going to give you your privacy. Call,
Okay.
come to fetch me. I'm right down the hall. Let me know when he wants me.
all right.
Yeah.
See you in a little bit
Yeah,
then.
you bet.
All right. Thanks.
You're okay with me here, right?
Sure.
Unless Lindsay wants Lindsay one of those bad ones?
No. I think for me it was being able to come into this industry, starting as making wine as a hobby, going back to school, changing careers, and working in the industry, coming to Oregon where I really wanted to work, and being able to make the wine, kind of like John, making it here and having everything come to fruition in the first vintage, being part of that process, learning from a person here that was involved in growing the grapes, planting the vineyard with Ed, and learning from him. That was kind of the aha, it's all coming together.
So that was a real personal.
Personal moment, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the other question, I think in a certain vintage we had some issues microbiologically that, in hindsight we should have done things differently. That was the kind of the OS moment. How did we let this happen?
It's just somebody
frustrating that we didn't take the care to details that we should have to make to prevent some spoilage from happening.
Spoilage that's in the production, not in the vineyard, but it's actually in the production.
In the production, yeah.
Oh, that must have been a heartbreak.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So some really good wine turned bad, unfortunately.
And that was like fairly rapidly, or was it like a year later?
It was in the bottle. Wine that we were really proud of, a proud vintage. Yeah.
Ooh. With white or red?
Red.
Red. Oh, that hurts.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What other, Bill, like from you, and then Lindsay, we'll get to you. What other kinds of things, when you think you're like very involved in the Oregon wine industry, and the people that are going to read this book are people that come from Oregon, obviously, but also from Indiana, from Ohio, from France, from Spain. What would you tell them that makes Oregon wine different than other regions that you know of? What makes Oregon wine special? If it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe Oregon wine.
I think it does. I think there is a unique terroir, to use the French term, of this area of the Willamette Valley.
And terroir to you, tell me what that means. It's like I hear that a lot.
It's the combination of weather and soil and location. The elevation, slope, all of that together makes a unique Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris that, even though it's the same variety in Burgundy and Alsace or wherever those varieties are grown, there's some unique fruit character to this area. We go just into Washington State and they're growing very little Pinot Noir, but they have Pinot Gris and other varieties that just are different because the soils are different and it's a different climate. So I think that's the main thing, is just the fruit profile, more fruit forward, better balance of acidity and fruit than other areas.
Talk a little bit about like the soil type, because you're at the southern end of the Willamette Valley.
Mm-hmm.
as I recall from the geology, is like you have, like the basaltic, the Jory here, and then apparently like Missoula floods came down here, too. Tell me a little bit about your soil.
This vineyard, the Lorraine Valley, is actually not in the Willamette Valley.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah, the drainage for the Willamette Valley goes north, and it's just this hillside here that the drain goes through the Umpqua, so it's draining south and towards the coast from here.
So the Missoula flood you never got any Missoula flood effect here?
I'm not sure. I would imagine there would have been some, but there must have been some distinction, geographic distinction, why this is flowing south and the Willamette River flows north.
Yeah, boy, it doesn't take much of a hill, does it?
Yeah.
Huh.
Because the Willamette forks start in the mountains just out here too. So yeah, I don't know all the history of that. But the main soil type here is bell pine. But
now, what's bell pine?
It's still a fairly dense clay silt loam has some iron content. Melatonin would be the one to tell you about the different soil chemistries.
Okay. But the bell pine, where did that come from?
I think it's sedimentary soil.
So it's from like the plates coming up, and it used to be ocean bottom or something at one time.
I believe so. I don't know that.
Yeah, sorry about putting you on the spot. It's like, I'm the dumb one here. Yeah. I always just assumed that this is the southern part of the Willamette Valley. So
technically not. No.
We're on the very tip of it. We're right below the tip of the Willamette.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you're still in the Willamette AVA.
Mm.
No.
No.
What AVA?
Oregon,
yeah.
Is what we use.
Oregon.
Mm-hmm. There's been no designated AVA for this area.
Huh.
We're kind of between the Willamette Valley and Willamette and Umpqua.
Huh.
Yeah, so that's why we put Oregon on our label.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. I gotta check my list here to see what other kind of questions I need to ask.
Mm-hmm. What time is it?
Around 11:30 of 11:50.
Okay.
Sorry here, I'm not as prepared as I'd like to have been.
Did you go over and taste yet?
I went, but we were looking at plates.
Okay.
Is there anything else that we need to put in this book?
About King Estate? Or about
More
Oregon?
About Oregon, and from the King Estate perspective,
Mm-hmm.
because like you guys have like a different perspective than a lot of the wineries up north.
Well, I think John alluded to this a little bit earlier about Pinot Gris and putting Pinot Gris on the map. I think definitely King Estate is the winery that brought national attention to that varietal.
Tell me a little bit about like the number of acres you have
the entire estate is a little bit over 1,000 acres, 1,090 something, 33, and so with all of the plantings that are going in, we'll be at you'll probably correct me on this one, 450, I believe, roughly, and probably
Pinot Gris.
Total
okay.
Vines, and probably 2/3 of that are Pinot Gris.
So that makes about how many acres of Pinot Gris?
300.
300, yeah.
About 300.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone told me that you guys have like the largest continuous acreage of Pinot Gris. Was it in North America or in the world or something like that?
I think we have the largest continuous organic vineyard in North America, which is a common thing I hear. But I don't know.
As far as Pinot Gris, I don't know. I don't think there's probably that large of continuous plantings in California. There's been some huge plantings in California. They have more acreage planted of Pinot Gris than Oregon total.
Sure.
Even in Silverton, somebody might be.
Yeah. But there's some big plantings going on in Oregon
now.
Yeah. So that's something you should talk with Ed about. The whole idea of how he and his father decided Pinot Gris is the thing to key on, but it was a great move on their part.
Yeah. That's one of my top questions for them. Yeah.
And then Pinot Noir too, I think, has always been a focus of his too, and to make world-class wines, red and white wines.
Yeah. Oh shoot, that just left my mind. Okay, I think that's probably all the questions that that I can think of.
Okay.
Right now. Yeah. So maybe should I
talk
with Lindsay for a little while?
Go ahead, and then
talk with Ed, and then
when do you want?
Are you doing the tasting now, or?
We can work that in whenever. You'll probably want to break for lunch at some stage.
Hey, it's like I'm type A. I go until midnight, and then I think, I should have a glass of wine and a little something to eat.
Because we can go over to the visitor center, once, if you want to interview Lindsay and then Ed, and then we can take a break for lunch. Or you could have lunch with Ed.
Whatever. I'm real easy on this. It's like I just know
I'll suggest that to him and see what he says.
Okay. The only thing is I do want to record because again my memory is. Sure. You've seen how faulty my memory is here. And,
recording is great. Yeah.
So I want to record it, and so sometimes people don't like to be recorded while they're munching on something.
Okay.
So
whatever.
Okay. Again, it's I'm real easy. I would like to get some photographs. I'd like to take a photograph of you. I'd like to take a photograph, Lindsay, of you, and a photograph of Ed, someplace. And you two probably somewhere in the production area. No thief, though. I want to do something else besides a thief. Got too many thief shots.
That's fine.
Well, we could do a tasting, or we...
tasting would be excellent.
Yeah.
Tasting would be excellent. Yeah. And you said it was in a lab?
Yeah.
And is your lab is it especially from your background, is it a pretty nice lab? I mean, you've got a lot of lab.
Everything is nice here.
Okay.
For the most part.
pretty much.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that sounds like a great situation then. All right. Yeah. Okay. So we'll do Lindsay now.
Okay.
Then Ed. Yep. And then all right.
I'll let her know.
Okay. Thank you. Lindsay, can I get you to put this on because I didn't come prepared to do big big group. Just anywhere, just as long as it's kind of close. Yeah, perfect. Okay, Lindsay, for the transcriber, can you tell me what your name is and what your job title is, or what I should call you in terms of a job title?
My name is Lindsay Kampf, and
Spell that?
Kampff as in Frank.
Okay.
And then Lindsay. And my title is winemaker, but I focus on the red wine, so red winemaker.
Okay. And so what brought you, what siren did you hear that brought you to, to the wine industry? How'd you get involved?
So I'm obviously very young in this industry, so I grew up around it.
Where?
I'm in Southern California.
Where?
My parents own a wine delivery business in Southern California.
Really?
So my mom and stepdad met working at Jordan selling wine 35 years ago, and then she went into her own distribution company down in Southern California, which is where I lived, and they were going on over 20 years of owning that business. So I was around it my entire life, and was really into the sciences in school, starting in high school, and then carried that on in college and got my degree in chemistry. And so from there, it was really figuring out where I fit in, and was it the wine industry or was it another field. But I'm the type of person, I'm analytical, but I really like a product, and I also like the interaction with people and like our consumers and trade and all of that. And so I started interning in Napa and spent some time at, my parents had set it up, and it was brief stays at each, but at Long Vineyards and Honig and Robert Mondavi. So I could get this 4,000 case to 20,000 case at that time. These cases to obviously Mondavi was huge, and I loved it, and I kind of did feel like I figured out kind of what size winery I wanted to work for, and it was more around that 40 to 50 to no more than 100 was what my goal was, because it was challenging and there was, enough to keep busy, different varietals and all of that. So I started taking some classes down outside of Santa Barbara. There's at Allen Hancock Junior College, which is in the Santa Ynez area. So I started taking viticulture classes there, and then came up and started interviewing for jobs right after college. And
came up to Oregon?
No, came up to Northern California, actually. And so I started working at Jordan Winery in Sonoma, in Sonoma Valley, Alexander Valley, right after I graduated. And then I transferred over to their sister company, J Vineyards and Winery, which they focus on sparkling and Pinot Gris and Pinot Noir. And that's where my huge interest in Pinot Gris and Pinot Noir came from. And they were hugely supportive of my growth. And during my stay there, they sent me to Australia for another harvest because it's off seasons, obviously. And shortly after I got back from there, my experience in Australia was the most enlightening experience I've had, especially in the younger part of my career, because it proved to me that I was really passionate about this industry. I wasn't doing it just because it was the family thing to do. When I was removed from everyone I knew, every family member, and just completely picked up and left everything for 3 months and was working the most insane hours you possibly could at a facility in Western Australia. I knew exactly where I wanted to spend the rest of my life, and this was it. So I started looking for different jobs. It was clear that it was about time to move forward, but I wasn't moving forward, due to just the structure of the company I was at, and I ended up coming up here. And so Bill was the one who originally had hired me, and I came on as the enologist, and King is really supportive of growth, and the sky is the limit. You take initiative and you have passion, and really you can be anything you want to be, and I think I've really proven that here, and he's helped me do that, because it was one step to assistant winemaker, and then associate winemaker, and then most recently red winemaker, which is huge, and it's a heavy load some days. But it's rewarding and challenging, and I think it always will be rewarding and very challenging, and that's what keeps me ticking and interested.
What about the Oregon wine culture? Let's see, you've been here since when?
Since it would be August of 04.
04.
Yeah, so about 3.5 years, yeah.
And so you've been in a lot of different wine cultures, California, Australia. How is the Oregon wine culture similar or different than the other wine cultures that you've experienced?
Do you mean like the community or?
Community, whatever comes to mind in terms of like wine culture, winemakers, it's like, are other winemakers friendly or less friendly, helpful?
Yeah, I would say that I've definitely felt that the Oregon industry has a great wine community. We have a little bit of a disadvantage in our location here because we don't have, 20 wineries right down the same street as us. And that was a little bit tough for me personally at first, because you miss that after leaving Healdsburg, where when you're going into town, you see winemakers and, other people in the wine industry all the time. And people in this industry know that you need that interaction because it's an insane business we're in. It's crazy the number of hours the winemakers work, and Bill and I look at each other, and your spouses probably think you're crazy, but deep down we get each other, and it's nice to have that interaction and support, and also advice. Some things that maybe I haven't experienced so far in winemaking, somebody else around the corner has, and can provide input so that really the whole Oregon message and Oregon wines are better as a whole. California, I think that they were there was close entities and then not so close at the same time. In Australia, it was very, we were also a little bit isolated there, but it was very, not much like as much of a wine community as I was used to. They were fewer and farther space between them, and really where I worked there was more of a production facility. I mean, it was a 5,000 ton facility, which is quite large. I enjoyed my time there, but it was really driven on, and this is more than a lot of wineries I had worked for in the past, driven on quality control, and they were ISO certified, and all of that stuff was really big to them there and very important, where here it's been more of, I feel like, driven on artistic side, and we're more catching up on the scientific side.
I mean, what does that mean, artistic side?
Well, I think when you are making a wine, you're blending a wine, you're bottling a wine, really you have to rely on your palate and, you know, your sensory to determine, you know, what wine you really want to put in the bottle. But in the end, though, there are so many tests that we can do nowadays that can assure that what you're tasting is what you're really getting, you know. And I think that we're just catching up in this industry in the States, really, of the scientific stuff that they're already using other places. I think we can get better, and also, though, I don't think you should ever rely too much on the science, even though I have a science background, you know. I focused all my time in the lab until just a couple of years ago, where I really have drawn back from there, and we rely heavily on our lab here for numbers and data, but in the end, it's, it really comes down to your palate, you know. So it's a combination of both, but I did notice that they were very more science-oriented and number-oriented rather than palate-driven at the winery I worked at.
Yeah. And so do you find, like, the Oregon, your experience here in Oregon, like, they're more, you called it artistic,
yeah,
oriented as compared to Australia and even California, or?
No, I think California has, I think California, they have an artistic, and I think it's case by case too. I mean, you work at a 4,000 case winery and they're not going to do any analysis or anything, you know what I mean? It's just very case by case basis, I think. But I've loved Oregon since I've moved up here. And part of it, too, is that in our area that you don't see a vineyard every mile on the highway, that you see this, I don't know, I think it's beautiful when you drive around this corner and all of this stuff is untouched and indigenous to this area, and then there's just one plot of land here that has these vineyards instead of everything indigenous taken out of the state, you know, where when I was to live in Sonoma, I mean, nothing was left, you know, that was originally there. And it's beautiful, you know, but it's just different.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't have a sense of what it was before anymore.
Yeah. And you find, like, in Oregon here, like, there's still that, what would you call it? That, you know, not wild, but,
I like native, but, Oregon feels like Oregon, where it doesn't try to be the next Napa Valley, or where everything is not. Yeah, I think that, you know, we'll continue to plant, and I think that primarily in Oregon, people are planting on the best land, not just any land, and that's why you're seeing so much of the indigenous plants here still, you know.
That's kind of an interesting perspective. And actually, I grew up in Napa and used to ride my bicycle through Alexander and Sonoma and all those. And if you go up in those hills, there's a lot of cool stuff still up there.
Right. No, and I'm a runner, so I used to go, and all the parks there, you know, and, you know, Annandale and some of those in Sonoma County. And I do know that there's a lot still preserved, but it's just interesting. You're just going straight down the highway, and it's, comparatively to here, it's, you know, very different. And maybe we'll catch up. They have so many more wineries than we do right at this point, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Let's see. For you personally, what has you've been in vineyards in the wine industry in a variety of different places and experienced it in different ways. What has like the vineyard, and I use the vineyard as a metaphorical, type of a thing, almost like representing the whole wine thing. What has that taught you about life?
That's an interesting question. I don't know how to answer that one. The vineyard for me has been something that I feel like is I have my biggest learning curve with, and that
still to learn from. You mean?
Yeah.
What kind of things
do I want to learn?
From, yeah.
Well, it's just each year there's new challenges. This harvest was challenging for me, and I could say it's a winemaker's year because we really had to manipulate more things. You had to decide a lot to do right when the fruit got there, but to me it was also grower's year of how could we have dealt with it better, and when should we have started, at what point. And I'm talking mostly there about thinning or powdery mildew control and different things like that once it runs away, you can't go back. There's so many things on the viticulture and the winemaking too, but that you can't go back and change that. And you're given what you're given in the winery, and that's about 10% of the battle. And I just feel like
10%, what's 10% of the battle?
Is the winemaking, and I feel like so much of it is in the vineyard. And where right now I feel like my knowledge is probably 70-80% focused on winemaking, and that balance hasn't caught up, you know what I mean? Where I think I go out into more and more vineyards all the time now, and we have a lot that we contract from though too. We contract from 40 different vineyards, as well as here, and it's hard enough to keep up with just here, So we're on the road all the time, and just little things that you see in the vineyards and interacting, I think, with that wine community that we've talked about. And this is on the east side of Oregon as well as in the Willamette Valley, that just going through vineyards with different vineyard managers is really enlightening, because something that you haven't experienced with a particular vineyard, they possibly have or might not have, but it's somebody, again, like winemaking, that you can bounce ideas off of. But yeah, I think it's still a learning curve for me.
What have like vineyard managers taught you? Maybe just think of one thing that you just in the last 8-10 months, that maybe you were out in Walla Walla and just whoa, I didn't know that.
Well, this year, particularly in Walla Walla, it was a really interesting season. Everything came in at once, really early, and then we had this lag time, and it got really, really cold in the valley, as well as here. It didn't get wet there, really, but really, really cold. And, Walla Walla is the first place we've dealt with where we bury canes there, and really...
Canes, what does that mean?
So they take one of the kicker canes, and they actually bury it underground so that if it was to freeze, that cane would be protected, so the vine wouldn't die completely, basically. It's a very common practice there. It's you look at the vines and they look like they haven't what am I talking about? They haven't cut off all their shoots. Like it doesn't look like a clean vineyard, and there'll actually be fruit hanging there, which should be cut off, but some vineyards don't during harvest. But it's basically buried just for the winter freeze, because they've had, 2 in the last 13 years, so they're protecting that. But this year it got very, very cold, where we were on the line of I have no tanks open, and you come up to that point where if I don't pick now, there's going to be something detrimental that's happening to the vine. And, I'm not really aware of that. I wasn't really, I've never been through a freeze like that. They needed moisture, basically, They needed to water, but they weren't going to irrigate before we picked. But this situation was something new that I went through with a vineyard manager, but had to be coached on, because I probably would have made a different decision. you know.
Which vineyard was that?
That was Seven Hills, but it was the west side. So Seven Hills East is on the hillside. That's the one owned by Norm McKibben and the managing partners. And this one is owned by, I want to say, Premier Pacific Vineyards. It's owned by a company that owns also Pepper Bridge Vineyards now. Norm had sold off all that property to them, and Tom Walliser manages it, as well as some other vineyards up there. So things like that. Also different insects that were, realizing the short shoot syndrome that we'll see with it's the stunted growth, and we're seeing different kinds of bugs that are really, you can't see them with the naked eye at all, and it takes even more than a lens. It's like a microscopic, but things like that I've been enlightened at in Walla Walla. So that type of thing where you just know what to look for, or different decisions to make, or when to drop fruit. I mean, we dropped fruit at really differing times than I would have used to do, this year. So things like that, I like to learn. I need to learn more of that.
Yeah. That's like when I asked that question about like what's the vineyard taught you about life. It's like you're learning, not only about like the vineyard and what it takes to grow good fruit, but you're probably learning about yourself too. And that's kind of like, I'm wondering, it's like what from that particular lesson, that series of lessons in the Walla Walla, what did Walla Walla teach you about yourself?
This year Walla Walla and the vineyards, they taught me I'm never going to know it all, but that that I do really put up the energy to get to that point, though, where you can know it all, and that I guess my goal ultimately is to have that time where you're the one that people are coming to for that information and for that input. And I have so many mentors, and it's wonderful. And when I can start mentoring people like myself, that will really be great. I just think, this harvest was challenging. I travel between here and Walla Walla for harvest because we make wines in Washington as well. And it did teach me a lot about myself. It taught me kind of about how far I can push myself and how...
In terms of physical limits, or in terms of like mentally and emotionally. I think just being on the road so much, I mean, you're already really busy during harvest, and so to then remove yourself and drive, thousands and thousands of miles during harvest to go up there, to me it was putting myself and my goals on a different level. It was really having to be always one step ahead. There was no option to be one step behind, because this winery and the red wine program would fail miserably. So it was always one step ahead, two steps ahead. And it was something that I hadn't felt in a lot of harvests. And I think it was just because that responsibility was given to me and I had such passion for it. I think I just needed to get the green light to say go, But it also taught me that that this planning and this, care that I gave these grapes and the balance that I want in those wines, I also know that deep down inside I do want that balance in my life eventually too. And I do get that at some points of the year. But, there's a give and take. There's a balance between how much you give to this industry and also how much you give to your family and other aspects of life, because that's what will make you do better in both, And that's always actually been a really big goal of mine here is to keep your life in balance.
Oh yeah, because that helps me here, and it's worked so far pretty well. But
yeah, do you have kids?
Mm-mm. Not yet, but no, I don't, and I'm not married yet. But I have those wants and desires that down the road eventually that you want that, and it's John and Bill both have kids and wives, and sometimes I do think it's challenging for them, with how much time they spend at the winery or in the vineyard, especially certain times of year, and just to make sure that those, besides harvest, that you do get that balance. You might not get it completely during harvest because that would be insane, but that you do eventually get it back.
Yeah. So after harvest, like about now, like Bill actually gets to see his wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
What, for you personally, what's been, and we're looking at just at Oregon, what's been like a real aha kind of a moment? Something where maybe you've tried something. Do you need to answer that?
No. It's okay.
Maybe you've tried something, or you thought, it's like this year I want to try this, and it worked, or just some like moment that was just a real aha kind of a moment.
In Oregon.
In Oregon. Yeah. This is Oregon books.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it was kind of similar to John's comment, because I was thinking about this when you asked that question to him. And I did start making my own wine here in 2005. And that, when that was in the bottle, was probably the greatest moment I've had so far. And it was just...
Happy birthday, Megan, today.
Oh, I didn't know it was her birthday today.
Yeah, and I think there's like Subway sandwiches or something. We're having a little Christmas thing here, so Janis, if you want to have lunch or something. Of course, it's awesome over at the visitor center.
The lunch or the
menu?
The lunch.
But this one in here if you want to mix in with the group.
Oh, great.
I can go grab some.
Okay.
All right.
Restrooms are here. You can wash your hands here in the kitchen, and then.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
You should get them a tour before, or somebody.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we will.
The nitty-gritty, including bottling. We're bottling.
Yeah.
That's what I understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
So, as I said, the vineyards I felt like, been my weakness, and Ed had given me this opportunity starting with the 05 vintage to pick a block from the estate and work with that specific block. And I proposed that, I would just make the wine from start to finish. And that's something that we do every day here, with all of our wines.
Yeah.
But where I physically wanted to do all of it, like obviously in Bill and I's position, we can't physically be doing all of the rackings every day and all of it, So it was learning the little ins and outs of our cellar and, making it particular to this winery and to this vineyard, the things I could learn. And Ed said, well, I think you should also learn about the sales and marketing, so I think you should label it, bottle it, and sell it. So that's what I did. And so when we finished that project, it was an amazing experience. And I remember selling we released it earlier this year, and I went into Higgins in Portland. And then my arm was just shaking because I wasn't a salesperson. I am not a good salesperson at all. I'm too honest, and also.
And me again. Mel's in there too.
Oh, okay.
Good time to catch him.
Okay, we'll be in a couple minutes. And I realized that if he didn't like it, it was just a real personal strike to me, And it went really well, He said right on the spot he took one sip and ordered 3 cases, and it just that whole project came full circle, and it just has taught me so much. And this year with that,
taught you so much in that, like you were personally affirmed, or
no, I just think that the whole process throughout the vineyard, and going pick with them, to the bottling, to the selling, like I just feel like it all came full circle. It all, to the point where sometimes being in this business and being in winemaking, you don't always understand what the sales end is doing, or why we're having the bottling date here, or why the vineyard is doing this, and and it made all those things pull together. And it's actually made me, I think, better at who I am in this winery, because I understand the financial implications now, and I more so than ever. Now I am on my 3rd vintage this year, and that was one of those oh shit moments when it wouldn't stop raining and I have all my fruit out there, and it's 20 tons of fruit out there, and it's that struck me more personally than anything in this industry. I know that.
So what struck you more personally?
The harvest.
Harvest.
Yeah, okay. And when it was interesting this year because last year we had a hailstorm come through here and we lost 100 tons of fruit. It was in May. It was late, and it was a really weird storm. It came just through the front of the property. The back vines weren't damaged at all, so we lost 100 tons. And after that, that was hard because a lot of it was Pinot Noir, some of it was Pinot Gris, and it did affect the following vintage, and but yeah, the weather just has its own effect on the wines, obviously, but now I felt more personally to it. You know what I mean? It's just everything that happened this harvest with the weather and the way harvest went, it just, affected me personally because it affected what I was going to be able to make and create and my goals with my own project as well, as the whole winery, so.
That's interesting. Nice lesson, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was the best thing I could have ever done to give me that opportunity because I don't think actually many people get the opportunity to really look at it from a vineyard manager's viewpoint, a winemaker's viewpoint, a seller's viewpoint, and an owner's viewpoint. And when you can do that, you really get this business, and you really understand why we have to challenge every single thing we do. It's not just like, you have to have the interaction with the vineyard. You have to have the interaction with sales. You have to have the follow through or else we're not going to be successful.
Yeah.
Or you're not going to be proud of what you put out there.
Yeah.
So.
Boy, it's when you're talking about that, it's like I've talked to a lot of winemakers for this, and one of the guys I talked to is a guy named Bob McRitchie. Mm-hmm. He's one of the original winemakers in the Willamette Valley, and he said almost exactly the same thing. He says, I've got to make it so it's profitable, and that has to go into the decision-making process of the wine.
Right.
I can't just my something just because I want to make it.
Right.
It has to be profitable.
It has to make sense, yeah. I mean, I bottled my wine this morning for 2006.
Is that right?
Yeah, and
cool.
So it's a stressful day, but it's because there's a lot that you've put out there, and it has to make sense. It has to make sense for you personally. It has to make sense for me here. I thought at first I wanted that project to grow, but at the same time, since I've been working with that fruit, what I do is I take this block, it's called 19G. It's a clone 113, which everyone thinks clone 113 can't stand on its own, and I proved them otherwise.
Cool.
And so I take it's about 20 tons of fruit that I get each year out of it, and I make all of that wine, and it turns out to be about 50 to 60 barrels, and then I pick my top few and make my own wine from it. It's a very small case production. Uh-huh. And from that, the rest of it is allocated towards wherever it may fit, signature Pinot Noir, domain Pinot Noir, and it's made up in the last couple of years more, about 50% of the domain. So Ed also saw that and, saw how a winemaker having their hands on it, it's just starting to change some of our practices, like no pumps in the cellar or different things, that we've done some things the way we have, and now we're starting to do some things a little bit differently,
Because of that perspective.
Yeah, a little bit different perspective. Like when you think about it in terms of, well, do you want us to go through a pump? And you're like, well, no. So why would we do it on everything? You know what I mean? Just that little aha, what was I thinking, And yeah, some things don't make sense because of time. But on our reserve stuff, we've, I think, made some changes in our cellar that will ultimately aid to the, perfection of those wines in the bottle. So, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. What a nice learning experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can just sense that from you that was a really good experience.
Yeah, it's the label was fun to design. I don't have one in here, but
you got to design the label too.
Well, yeah, I worked with a designer on it, and I had given him an idea and just, had to have him put it on the paper. And the wine is called Journey Red, and so it's kind of describing and paying tribute to all of the people and places and experiences that have impacted me in my career. And so 2 of the names that are on it are Bill Kramer and EDK. So it has all of these words that looks like a design, but there's names of people, places, and things that have impacted me.
Cool. When I take a photograph of you, I'd like to take a photograph of you with a bottle.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean that's a signature moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I'm kind of thinking that that's probably all the questions that I have. Can you think of anything else? You know, thinking that the people that are going to read this book,
Mm-hmm.
you know, are from all over the world, from France, from Ohio, Indiana, you know, from all over the world. You know, what else would you like to tell those people that makes Oregon wine really special?
Well, one thing that I love about Oregon wine, and I thought honestly that I would go back to California by now.
Really?
Yeah, I came up here for the experience, but I honestly in no way was committed to the longevity of it. And now I will never go back, probably.
Wow.
And part of it is the fruit that we are able to get and produce up here. At wineries I've worked with in the past, there was not as much balance in the fruit that we were getting off of the vine, and lots of different manipulations need to be made, no matter if it was, you know, water or
Manipulations
acid.
in the production rather than in the
Yeah.
field.
Mm-hmm. And anyways, the longevity of those wines, and I know a lot of people don't age their wines anymore, but the longevity of those wines was really, really short. You know, it was, we did verticals, and really the 5 years back of Pinot Noir were already fading, you know, away in the wind. And now coming here, and in my first couple of months I was here, we did a vertical back to 92. And it still has this great fruit in it. And it's just, you know, and it's not like it was when it was bottled, and we all know that. But it still has something there. And that was just the most fascinating thing to me. And, you know, there is some really jammy and great wines in California. I could never, you know, in France and, you know, Australia, lots of places for that matter. And I could never say that one place is superior to the other. But one thing that I've really enjoyed is that we're making wine but not really manipulating wine as much. You know, it's kind of letting the fruit speak for itself, and then you kind of get to play with blending more rather than, manipulating each individual lot to make it what you want to be. One thing about working on this property with its organic certification and our organic vineyards is that it's the most balanced in structure. It's the most balanced in terms of like nutrients, which we run nutrients in our lab from every vineyard we source from, and we have the most highest consistent nutrients that we see. And with that will aid in healthy fermentations. So again, it's this thing that during your fermentation you're not even needing to supplement it with different types of nutrient additives and stuff like that. So there's a couple things of just, I feel like more connection with the fruit because you're really letting the fruit speak for itself in the wine.
And it's possible because of the weather and what makes that possible?
I think kind of like what Bill was talking about, the terroir, the weather, the soil, the climate. I mean, I don't know that is true for everywhere in Oregon. I don't know, but a lot of the vineyards that we deal with, I do feel that there's this great balance, great structure, just that I really haven't experienced before. I just think Oregon, especially for Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris, it's just the definition of balance in those varietals is Oregon,
Yeah.
So.
Oh shoot! I had another good question I was going to ask you. It slipped out. Well, it'll come sometime.
Okay.
All right. I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
So,
Hold on. It's like it takes. There we go.
So the people in this Oregon industry, some of the older generation that is getting ready to pass on the torch and retire or different things. And I don't know if winemakers ever fully retire because we always do it as a hobby. But they are, really mentoring all of us to take over the legacy that they left, And, I've had incredible mentors. I mean, that's what my whole label pays tribute to, is to my mentors, And one thing I said to, who was actually a young mentor, Chris Figgins of Leonetti Cellars, and I said, thank you so much for all your help. Like, I couldn't have done this without you. This was our first vintage of NXNW, one of our labels. And I praised my mentor so much. And he said, Lindsay, take a step back. I might have given you input. I might have given you advice. We might have tasted together quite a bit. But you did it, And that's exactly what you need from your mentors. And I just think that the older people in this industry have definitely paved a good path. And I hope that we can continue to keep up the legacy of Oregon. So.
Yeah. Let me ask you, originally I wasn't going to ask you this, but I'm going to go ahead and ask you this. It's like, what do you see, and let me give you a little background, like why I asked this. Like in France, like in Burgundy, and, those areas, I mean, like that wine industry and those vineyards have been there for centuries and centuries. And like their culture is a lot different than the American culture, and the Oregon culture is even different than the American culture,
right?
In general, and the Eugene culture is even different than the Oregon culture. What do you see? Will the Oregon wine industry last? Here, and if it does, it's like, how do you see it changing when you look forward?
I do think that the Oregon industry will last. I think it will evolve, and I think it will grow and get bigger.
Bigger in terms of how get bigger? Like numbers, or bigger in terms of like size of the winery, or how? A
little bit of both, I see. Because even some of the wineries that were quite a bit smaller when I came up here, have grown a lot and are doing a lot of new plantings that obviously won't be in production for a number of years. So seeing how many plants have gone in the ground, I've got to hope it's going to grow, because we've got to have some place for it to grow. But I came to this winery and it was 74,000 cases, and we're above 135 now. So I obviously feel the growth. What was the second part of that question?
Well, it's all one question. It's like, I'm just kind of looking, like, will it last? And then what will it look like in 30 or 50 years? And that's quite a ways out.
Yeah. I do feel like a little bit of it, I think there's a resistance to this, but a little bit of it will be more commercialized, maybe a little bit more like it has been in California, of the tasting room after tasting room after tasting room, even to the extent where they're proposing like toll roads and different things, in the Dundee area, because there's so much traffic as it is, So obviously things have got to change, and it will be more. It will have a different look and feel to it, and I don't know how that will affect the industry. But I like the quaint industry that we have now. I kind of like the number of wineries we have, because I like that every winery, I feel like, is pretty well respected, instead of a lot of people that we don't know if they're going to make it or not, or getting into the business because they have a love of wine, but they don't really have a passion for making the wine. And I think that can be problematic. But yeah, I think this industry is going to grow in one way or another, no matter if we want it to or not. And wineries will get larger, and there will be more of them. And it will be interesting to see how we deal with it, the space of it, and also that I hope we continue to pick the best vineyard sites in the state and not just spread out wherever there's land, And I think that will be a huge key to our success. And I think most of the Oregon winemakers would be on board with that, though, Because that's what most of them really believe in. I feel like they're more vineyard growers than winemakers, So.
Yeah.